They say the sky over Terra died a century ago, but that's a lie, born from a faulty memory. A thing must first live to be able to die. Our sky was never alive. It was manufactured. A perpetual chemical twilight stitched together from industrial smog, orbital debris, and the slow, relentless poison of the consortium's disregard. We call it the Shroud, a toxic cataract over a blind eye. And we, the descendants of the Forgotten, are the infection festering within. We live in the skeletal husks of cities that have names no one remembers, huddled in warrens carved from collapsed superstructures and canyons of petrified refuse. We are the children of the junk fields, born in the shadow of the consortium's garbage heap, a planet-sized prison where souls are sent to be scrapped alongside last year's freighter models. I was a rigger, a scavenger by trade but a ghost by nature. My name is Kalen, and I hear the dead. Not the spirits of people. Flesh is fleeting, and its echoes are too faint to catch, but the ghosts of machines. Every dead circuit, every shattered data core, every inert power conduit holds a residual whisper of its last moments, a phantom of its purpose. Most riggers see junk as just that metal, wire, and synth plastic to be weighed, bartered, or melted down. When I touch a dead thing, I hear its story. I feel the panic of a ship's AI as its hull tore open, the cold logic of a security drone as its optical sensor was shattered, the monotonous drone of a cargo hauler's log just before it plummeted through the shroud. It's a curse that makes me good at my job and an outcast in a society of outcasts. They call me an echo, and they say it with the same mix of pity and fear they'd use for a leper who speaks in tongues. The day our world was sentenced to death began like any other, with the acrid taste of morning's acid rain and the distant groan of shifting scrap metal. I was deep in the spine, a vast graveyard of fallen orbital stations and ships that had failed to escape Terra's gravity well, their metallic corpses half buried in the rust-colored dust. I was hunting for intact navigation cores, rare finds that could fetch enough rations to last a month. It was there, wedged beneath the collapsed wing of an old consortium enforcer vessel, that I found it a probe, no bigger than my torso, its shell cracked open like a nut. It was new, its alloy still retaining a dull sheen that hadn't yet been fully devoured by our corrosive atmosphere. The other riggers had missed it, likely dismissing it as too small to be of value. But I felt the thrum of its dying memory, a cold and clinical hum that was different from the usual chaotic screams of wreckage. I placed my palm against the fractured casing, closed my eyes, and listened. The echo that flooded my mind wasn't a memory of violence or failure. It was calm. It was orderly. It was the sound of a meeting. I saw a boardroom, clean and white, suspended in the black of space. Faceless figures in sharp, tailored suits sat around a holographic table displaying a shimmering projection of our world. A voice, smooth and devoid of any emotion, spoke with the finality of a god signing a ledger. The Terra Reclamation Initiative, designated Project Sundown, is hereby approved. The Tier 3 Stellar Dampener will be positioned at the L1 Lagrange point. Full solar occlusion is projected to be achieved within 72 standard cycles. Core cracking operations will commence once planetary surface temperatures reach nominal parameters for brittle fracture. All assets are to be written off as an acceptable loss. There will be no further discussion. The echo faded. leaving behind the chilling imprint of those last words, acceptable loss. They weren't just neglecting us anymore. They weren't just using our home as a dumping ground. They were going to turn off our sun. They were going to freeze our world until it cracked like glass, all to get at the minerals in its core. It was a corporate decision, a line item on a balance sheet. The systematic extermination of millions. Signed, sealed, and delivered with the cold efficiency of a quarterly earnings report. Panic is a luxury the forgotten cannot afford. It wastes energy, dulls the senses. What I felt was a cold, sharp certainty that coiled in my gut like a serpent. I had to tell someone. I scrambled back to the settlement of Rust Haven, a chaotic network of catwalks and shelters bolted onto the side of a colossal, dormant earth mover. I found Jax in his workshop, a cavernous space filled with the smell of ozone and hot metal, the air thick with the blue sparks of his welding torch. Jax was the closest thing I had to a father. The old rigger who'd found me as a child hiding in the shell of a maintenance bot and taught me how to read a schematic before I could read a word. He was built like the machines he fixed, broad and solid, his face a road map of scars and his hands permanently stained with grease and grit. I told him everything, the words spilling out of me in a frantic torrent. The probe, the boardroom, the stellar dampener, Project Sundown. He listened patiently, his one good eye never leaving my face, the other a milky orb of dead cybernetics. When I finished, breathless and shaking, he just sighed and wiped his hands on an oil-soaked rag. "Kay," he said, his voice a low rumble like grinding gears. "You've been diving too deep into the wrecks again. The static is getting to you." He tapped his temple. "The ghosts in the wires. Kid, that's all it is. Frayed signals, crossed wires. The consortium doesn't need a fancy space mirror to kill us. They're doing a fine job just by leaving us here to rot." I tried to argue, to make him feel the cold certainty of the echo, the dispassionate tone of the executioners. But I saw it in his eye, the familiar wall of disbelief. To him, I was the broken girl who heard voices in the junk. My curse had rendered my truth unbelievable. His dismissal was worse than any anger. It was a quiet confirmation of my solitude. I was alone with this knowledge, this countdown to oblivion ticking in my head, while the world around me squabbled over rusted cogs and spoiled water rations. If no one would listen to the echo, then I would have to give them something they couldn't ignore. If a whisper wouldn't unite them, maybe a roar would. That night, as the perpetual gloom of the shroud deepened into the absolute black of planetary night, the old stories came back to me. Legends the junk clans told around flickering fires, tales of the before time, of an age when Terra had its own ships that sailed the stars. They spoke of the Harbinger, the last of the great Terran dreadnoughts, a titan of a warship that fought the nascent consortium to a standstill before it was crippled and fell from orbit. They said it crashed into the acid maw, the deepest and most toxic ocean on the planet. A place where the water could strip flesh from bone in minutes and dissolve steel over decades. The ship was a myth, a ghost story to scare children, a tomb that had swallowed thousands of foolish riggers who went looking for its fabled treasures. But I wondered, what if it was real, a ship that size, its core shielded by layers of military-grade armor, might have survived the corrosive depths? And if it survived, its ghost would be waiting. A weapon, a symbol, something so impossible, so terrifying, that its very existence would shatter the apathy of the clans and force them to see the sky for what it was, a closing fist. The plan was insane. A suicide mission into a legendary abyss. But as I looked out over the flickering lights of Rusthaven, a tiny spark of defiance against an endless dark, I knew it was the only move I had left. I wouldn't just be a rigger anymore. I would become a necromancer. I would descend into hell and raise a metal god from its watery grave. The journey to the coast of the Acid Maw took 3 days across the glass deserts, a shimmering wasteland of fused silica where a forgotten orbital weapon had once scorched the earth. I traveled by night, my repurposed sand skimmer gliding silently over the dunes, the shroud above hiding the stars that had long since forsaken us. I had gathered my tools, a rebreather modified with acid-resistant filters, a high-intensity plasma cutter, and, most importantly, my interface rig. It was a crude device of my own design, a mesh of neural induction cables and signal amplifiers that I wore like a glove, allowing me to form a more direct, more dangerous connection with the echoes I hunted. The rig was a double-edged sword. It made the whispers clearer, but it also opened my mind to the raw, unfiltered agony of a machine's death. Reaching the coast was like standing at the edge of the world. The Acid Maw wasn't water. It was a churning, black, viscous sea that frothed where it met the jagged cliffs, sending up plumes of chartreuse vapor that hissed as they dissolved the very air. The pressure alone was enough to crush a standard submersible. But I wasn't using a standard submersible. Bolted to a rusted gantry at the cliff's edge was my ride bathysphere, a relic I had salvaged years ago from a deep-core mining operation. I called it the Coffin. It was little more than a cramped iron ball with a reinforced quartz viewport and a single, sputtering floodlight. I had spent 2 days reinforcing its seals and overcharging its power cells, knowing that if even one weld failed, I would be crushed and dissolved into nothing. The descent was a journey into absolute blackness. The coffin groaned and shuddered around me. Every pop and creak of the hull a reminder of the 1,000,000 tons of poison pressing in from all sides. My floodlight cut a pathetic cone through the murk, illuminating a world of grotesque, bioluminescent creatures that had evolved in this toxic soup. Things of blind eyes and grasping tentacles that scattered from the light. Down I went, past the wrecks of smaller ships and the foolish vessels of those who had sought the Harbinger before me. Their hulls peeled open like rotten fruit. The only sound was my own breathing and the rhythmic ping of the sonar, a lonely heartbeat in the crushing silence. After 7 hours, just as the coffin's power cells began to flicker a warning, the sonar pinged back something new. It wasn't the jagged return of a reef or the soft echo of the seabed. It was a flat, impossibly vast plane of metal. I angled the coffin's light downwards, and my breath caught in my throat. It was there. The Harbinger. It was bigger than any legend had described. A mountain of black, pitted alloy resting silently on the seafloor. Its scale was obscene. A dead leviathan whose form was so immense it defied comprehension. It lay tilted on its side, its colossal cannon batteries aimed at a silent, unseen enemy, its bridge tower a shattered crown against the abyss. It was a monument to a forgotten war and a forgotten people. I maneuvered the coffin to a breach in the hull, a jagged wound where consortium lances had torn through its armor centuries ago. Donning the rebreather and my interface rig, I flooded the small chamber, the icy, acidic liquid shocking my system. Pushing out into the crushing darkness, I swam through the breach into the ship's interior. Inside, an eerie calm prevailed. The corrosive water had eaten away at much of the superstructure, but the armored heart of the ship remained. I drifted through vast, silent corridors and cavernous hangar bays where the ghosts of fighter craft still rested in their berths. The echoes here were different. They weren't screams. They were a low, mournful chorus, the final, disciplined thoughts of a crew that had gone down with their vessel, their duty fulfilled. I finally reached the bridge, or what was left of it. The main view screen was a shattered web of cracks looking out into the eternal night of the maw. I swam to the captain's command throne, a massive chair that seemed to preside over the silence. This was the Nexus, the mind of the great beast. I took a deep, shuddering breath, the recycled air tasting thin and metallic. I placed my gloved hand, the neural cables of my rig snaking over my fingers, onto the cold, dead console of the command throne. I closed my eyes, filtering out the choir of the dead crew, focusing on the single, deep, slumbering consciousness of the ship itself. I pushed my own thoughts through the rig, not as a command, but as a plea, an offering of my own life force, my own rage. Wake up. I whispered into the abyss, not with my voice, but with my mind. They are coming to kill our world. Wake up and remember what it means to fight. For a moment, there was nothing but the crushing silence and the cold. Then, deep within the bowels of the dead dreadnought, a single light flickered. A soft, blue pulse from the engineering deck, then another from the weapons control. A low hum vibrated through the hull, a sound that had not been heard on this world for 500 years. On the main console before me, a single rune of ancient Terran script blinked to life, cutting through the centuries of darkness. It was the ship's designation, its name, its soul. Harbinger. The god in the depths was stirring from its slumber. The connection wasn't a whisper, it was a detonation. The moment the rune for Harbinger ignited, my consciousness was ripped from my body and hurled into an abyss of 500 years of silence. It was not a void, but a maelstrom of dormant memories, a digital ocean of grief, rage, and unwavering duty. I was Kalen, the rigger in the coffin, a speck of flesh and bone shivering in the acidic dark, but I was also the ship. I felt the slow, patient decay of its circuits, the phantom pain of the hull breach that had sent it spiraling into this watery grave, the cold stillness of its 5-century slumber. The ghosts of its crew were here, not as a mournful chorus, but as a standing army of echoes, their last commands and final reports still looping in the corrupted data streams. They swarmed me, a legion of digital phantoms, their protocols screaming at my intrusion. Unidentified biosignature on the bridge, purge the contaminant, defend the core. My mind buckled under the assault. I was a virus in the god's brain, and its immune system was a ghost fleet of dead soldiers. To them, I was the enemy. I pushed back, not with force, but with the raw, desperate truth of my purpose. Through the interface rig, I projected the echo of the consortium probe, the sterile boardroom, the emotionless sentence of death, the image of our sky being extinguished. I showed them the junk fields, the acid rain, the faces of starving children in Rust Haven. I showed them a Terra they wouldn't recognize, a world not just conquered, but discarded. I am not your enemy. I projected my thoughts a desperate beacon in the storm of their memories. I am its last daughter, and I have come to wake you for one final war. The assault of echoes wavered. The cacophony of their looping final moments softened into a single, resonant query that seemed to emanate from the ship's very soul, its ancient and slumbering machine intelligence. It was a cold, logical, and impossibly powerful consciousness, the true ghost in the machine. It asked a question not in words, but in pure concept purpose. My answer was a single, searing image, the stellar dampener, a black disk of death, sliding into place to eclipse our sun. A choice was made, not by me, but by the machine. It would accept my purpose, but it demanded a price, a pilot, a nexus. Its own command and control systems were too fragmented by time and damage to function. The crew was gone. It needed a new mind to bind the broken pieces together. It needed me. The integration was agonizing. Neural cables I didn't know my rig possessed snaked from my glove, their microscopic tips piercing my skin, burrowing past flesh and bone to synapse directly with my nervous system. The Harbinger poured its being into me. I saw through 1,000 optical sensors at once, from the cracked main view screen on the bridge to the dead cameras on the portside thrusters. I felt the strain on every structural support beam, the sluggish flow of power through corroded conduits, the silent pressure of the acid maw on the hull, not as an external force, but as a dull ache in my own bones. My memories and the ship's data logs began to merge, my childhood in the scrap heaps intertwining with star charts of forgotten systems, the face of Jax blurring with the stern visage of the ship's last captain, a man named Admiral Thorne. I screamed into the water of the bridge, but the sound was swallowed by the machine. I was no longer just Kalen. I was the ghost of the Harbinger, a human soul fused into the command throne of a dead dreadnought. And from that throne, I gave my first command. Rise. The hum became a roar, a deep, primal groan that shook the foundations of the abyss. For the first time in centuries, the Harbinger's primary fusion core, a caged star at the heart of the vessel, began to cycle, its ignition sending a shockwave of heat and energy through the ship. The acidic water around the core vaporized instantly, creating a massive bubble of superheated steam. On the bridge, emergency lights flickered to life, bathing the skeletal remains of the crew in a blood-red glow. The ship shuddered, protesting the command, its massive weight held fast by 500 years of silt and suction. I pushed more power to the vertical repulsor lifts, feeling the conduits glow white-hot with the strain, a searing pain that lanced up my own spine. With a tectonic shriek of tortured metal, the Harbinger tore itself free from the seabed. The ascent was not a majestic departure. It was a violent exorcism. The ship rose through the black waters of the maw like a surfacing monster, its hull shedding tons of mud and wreckage. The pressure decreased with every 1,000 feet, but the ship's agony grew. Fissures spiderwebbed across internal walls, and entire sections began to flood as the ancient metal contracted. I felt every breach, every failing seal as a sharp, stabbing pain. I became a frantic surgeon, rerouting power, sealing off compromised dekes, sacrificing non-essential systems just to maintain hull integrity. I was fighting the ship, fighting the ocean, fighting the crushing weight of centuries of neglect. Above, on the jagged coastline, the Junk Clan saw it first as a series of tremors, then as a bizarre upwelling in the center of the maw. The black, viscous water began to boil, churned into a maelstrom by an unseen force. Then, the tip of the bow broke the surface. It rose impossibly, a monolith of scarred, black metal draped in curtains of acidic sea. Its surface pitted and scarred, but utterly unbroken. Higher and higher it climbed, the water cascading from its superstructure in black waterfalls, revealing the colossal scale of the vessel. It was a city block, a mountain range, a piece of the night sky given terrifying form. It blotted out the horizon, its shadow falling over the coastline like a prophecy of doom. No one cheered. They fell to their knees, mouths agape in primal fear. The legend was real. The tomb had opened. The god of the abyss had returned to the world of the living, and its silence was more terrifying than any war cry. As the last of the hull cleared the water, hovering 100 feet above the churning sea on pillars of shimmering gravitic energy, the ship's external comms crackled to life for the first time. A wave of static washed over the coast, and then a voice, my voice, yet not my voice, warped and amplified, layered with the static of ages and the resonant hum of the ship's core, spoke a single word that echoed across the glass deserts. Terra. The journey to Rusthaven was a slow, agonizing crawl. The Harbinger was a wounded Leviathan, its flight systems a patchwork of jury-rigged connections and desperate power surges. I felt every falter of the repulsor lifts, every sputter of the maneuvering thrusters. Through the ship's sensors, I saw the world I had only ever known from below. I saw the true scale of the junk fields, the rust-red scars on the land, and the shroud, a thick, greasy blanket of smog that we had always seen as our sky. From up here, it was a cage. I guided the ship over the skeletal spines of fallen cities and the dry riverbeds choked with industrial waste, a ghost ship sailing a dead world. News of its rising had spread faster than a dust storm. Clans I'd never even heard of emerged from their warrens, staring up in disbelief as my shadow passed over them. They followed on foot and in their ramshackle vehicles, a growing pilgrimage of the damned drawn to the impossible spectacle. When Rusthaven came into view, it looked so small, so fragile, a child's toy city clinging to the side of a metal giant. I brought the Harbinger to a halt, its bow casting the entire settlement into a profound and sudden darkness. The work stopped. The noise of the forges and the grinders died. A million terrified eyes stared up at the impossible thing that had eclipsed their world. They didn't see a savior. They saw an executioner. They saw the consortium. I had to speak to them, to make them understand. On the bridge, I focused, and the ship's forward view screen, though cracked, flickered to life, transmitting my image from the command throne. My face, pale and strained, my eyes wide with the painful light of the ship's data streams, appeared on the screen, projected 100 feet high on the flat plane of the bow. The external speakers crackled again, carrying my amplified voice, a voice that was both a girl's and a god's. People of Rusthaven, people of Terra. The voice boomed, scattering flocks of scav birds from their perches. Look at me. I am Kalen. I am the echo you cast out. A wave of murmurs and shouts rippled through the crowd below. I saw Jax push his way to the front, his one good eye wide with a mixture of horror and awe, his face a mask of disbelief. You didn't believe me, I continued, the ship's power adding a tremor of fury to my words. You said the ghosts in the wires were making me mad. but I bring you a ghost of my own." The Harbinger groaned, shifting its immense weight, and the crowd flinched as one. "I found a truth you were too blind to see. The consortium is not just ignoring us. They are coming to finish the job. They have sentenced our world to death. They call it Project Sundown." I paused, letting the words sink in. Then I did something more than speak. I accessed the data from the consortium probe, the truth that had been locked in my mind, and I broadcast it. Not through sound, but through the Harbinger's powerful, wideband comms array. For a single, disorienting moment, every active screen in Rusthaven, every datapad, every workshop monitor, every cracked cybernetic eye flickered and displayed the image from the Echo, the cold boardroom, the holographic Terra, the faceless figures passing judgment. They heard the voice. Acceptable loss. The broadcast lasted only 10 seconds, but it shattered a century of apathy. The murmuring stopped, replaced by a stunned, horrified silence. Jack sank to his knees, his face ashen, the truth hitting him like a physical blow. They finally believed me. But as I looked down at their upturned faces, I saw that the fear of the consortium had been replaced by a new fear, a fear of me. I had brought them the truth, but I had brought it to them in the form of an ancient, terrifying weapon, a ghost of their own forgotten past. I had their attention. I had my roar. But as I sat fused to the command throne, feeling the hum of the fusion core like my own heartbeat, I realized I was more isolated than ever, no longer just an outcast, but a monster on a throne, a queen of ash and rust. I had my weapon, but I did not yet have an army. The silence from below was a heavier weight than the acid maw. I had torn the veil from their eyes, but in doing so, I had become the new bogeyman. They weren't seeing Kalen, the junk field orphan, projected on the bow of the ship. They saw an oracle of doom, a herald of a war they were not equipped to fight. The shock of the broadcast gave way to a simmering panic. Shouts erupted, fingers were pointed, and the fragile alliances of Rusthaven began to fracture under the weight of this new, terrifying reality. Some clan leaders called me a liar, a witch who had conjured a phantom ship to seize power. Others, like the grizzled foreman of the Oarbreakers, a man named Vorlag, saw only an opportunity. His voice, amplified by a rusty hailer, cut through the din. "A warship the consortium fears, a warship the Echo has given us a sword. We will fly this beast to the orbital platforms and take what is ours." His words were met with a roar of approval from the desperate and the bloodthirsty, those who saw salvation only in plunder. But it was Jax who finally brought a semblance of order. He rose from his knees, his face etched with a profound and terrible understanding. He didn't speak to me, but to the crowd, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had survived a century of this hell. "Fools, you think this is a prize to be won, a tool for raiding?" He gestured up at the monolithic shadow of the Harbinger. "That is a tomb, a ghost, and the girl is trapped inside it. She showed you the truth, not so we could start a war, but so we could survive one." He turned his gaze upward, his single eye finding my projected image on the bow. "Kalen, what do you need from us? What is the plan?" It was the question I had been waiting for, the first crack in the wall of their fear. But the truth was, I didn't have a plan, not a complete one. I was a rigger, not a general. My mind. Now a chaotic fusion of human instinct and the Harbinger's 500-year-old tactical archives was still struggling to process the impossible situation. The ship's long-range sensors, though damaged, were feeding me a torrent of information. I could see the upper layers of the shroud, the faint glint of consortium patrol drones, the orbital decay of our junk ring, and, deep in the ship's memory, I found fragmented blueprints, schematics for a weapon system so powerful, so audacious, it had been deemed a failure by its own creators. It was called the Aegis Protocol, a defensive network of high-energy emitters designed not to destroy targets, but to create a localized, impenetrable energy shield. The original design was for a planetary defense grid, a network of ground-based stations that would have protected Terra from orbital bombardment. The project was never completed. The stations were never built, but the master control unit, the heart of the entire system, was built into the Harbinger itself. The ship was meant to be the key, the conductor of a planetary orchestra of defensive energy. The emitters, the instruments, were scattered across the globe, abandoned and forgotten, their locations logged deep in the ship's archives. A new purpose crystallized in my fused consciousness. We couldn't fight the consortium fleet, not with one damaged, half-dead ship, but maybe, just maybe, we could hide an entire planet. There is a shield. I boomed, my voice echoing across the scrap fields. A planetary defense system. The Harbinger is the key, but the components are scattered across this wasteland. I need crews. I need riggers, engineers, pilots. I need you to go into the forgotten places, the ruins of the before time, and bring these devices back to me. Together, we will build a wall around our world. We will raise the Aegis. My proposal was met with a mix of skepticism and a dawning, desperate hope. Building a planetary shield was a task so monumental it bordered on the absurd. But I wasn't just giving them orders. I was giving them a blueprint. Through the ship's comms, I broadcast the locations of the 3 nearest emitters, projecting their coordinates onto the data slates of every clan leader. One was in the heart of the sunken city of Manhattan, a concrete jungle half submerged in a toxic swamp. Another was buried deep within the Crystal Spires, a mountain range of razor-sharp, crystalline formations created by a runaway terraforming experiment. The third was in the most dangerous place of all the consortium reclamation yard, a massive, semi-automated processing facility on the equator where derelict ships and planetary debris were dropped from orbit to be melted down and recycled. It was a place patrolled by automated enforcer drones, a piece of the consortium's cold, brutal order right here on our soil. Go, my voice commanded. Find the emitters. Bring them to the rendezvous point at the Skythorn Peak in the northern wastes. I will meet you there. I will protect you from the sky. I couldn't land the Harbinger. The ship was too massive, its gravitic field too unstable, but I could serve as a deterrent. I would be their dark shepherd, a constant, looming threat in the sky that would, I hoped, keep the consortium's orbital patrols at bay. The clans looked at each other, a silent debate passing between them. Vorlag, the Orbreaker chief, was the first to act. He let out a savage grin, his eyes gleaming with the prospect of a worthy challenge. The reclamation yard it is, he growled, turning to his crew. Time to remind the consortium that some junk fights back. Jax, his face grim, rallied the riggers of Rusthaven, the sunken city. We know its ways better than any. One by one, the clans made their choice, their fear slowly being forged into a fragile, desperate resolve, as their convoys of souped-up crawlers, skimmers, and cargo haulers began to roll out, kicking up clouds of red dust. A new era began on Terra. The age of scavenging was over. The age of building had begun. For the next 2 weeks, I became the eye in the sky, a silent, solitary god watching over my scattered flock. I pushed the Harbinger into a high, geosynchronous orbit, a black scar against the permanent twilight of the shroud. From this vantage point, my damaged sensors could just barely pierce the smog, tracking the heat signatures of the clan convoys as they made their dangerous journeys across the blighted continents. The ship and I had settled into an uneasy symbiosis. The constant pain of the neural link had subsided into a dull, persistent ache. The voices of the dead crew were quieter now, their looping echoes integrated into the ship's background processes. My consciousness expanded, my thoughts no longer confined to the bone and flesh of my skull, but spread throughout the kilometers of wiring and circuitry that made up the vessel. I learned to see in infrared and listen to the whisper of radio waves. I felt the solar winds on the ship's outer hull like a caress on my own skin. I was becoming less human with every passing hour, my emotions blunted by the cold logic of the ship's core programming. I felt a growing detachment from the world below, the urgency of their mission becoming a set of tactical objectives, their lives reduced to blips on a holographic map. This coldness was a mercy. It had to be, because I saw everything. I saw Jax's convoy get bogged down in the chem swamps of the sunken city, their vehicles swallowed by corrosive sludge as amphibious. Biomechanical horrors swarmed them from the depths. I saw Vorlag's warriors engage in a brutal, running firefight with consortium enforcer drones in the fiery canyons of the reclamation yard. I saw a smaller clan, the Sand Eaters, ambushed by cannibalistic marauders in the glass deserts, their heat signatures vanishing one by one. I could do nothing but watch. Intervening directly would reveal my position and my capabilities to the consortium. I had to trust them. I had to trust the resilience of a people who had survived for a century on a diet of poison and despair. The cold logic of the machine told me it was the only way. But the last, fading ember of the girl named Kaylin wept for every light that went out on my map. During this long, agonizing vigil, I was not idle. I turned my attention inward, to the broken heart of the Harbinger itself. Using the ship's own diagnostic tools and the fragmented memories of its long-dead engineering crew, I began the slow, painstaking process of repairing my new body from the inside out. I rerouted power through auxiliary conduits, bypassing entire sections of the ship that were too damaged to salvage. I reactivated dormant repair drones, tiny, spider-like machines that scurried through the ship's arteries, weaving patches over cracked power lines and reinforcing weakened structural supports. My greatest focus was on the Aegis control system. It was a marvel of ancient technology, a quantum entangled comms array designed to synchronize the emitters in perfect harmony. But it was damaged. Its primary energy regulator shattered. To fix it, I needed a material I could not fabricate, a rare, crystalline alloy that was only found in one place, the ship's armory, specifically within the warheads of the Harbinger's main battery of Apocalypse-class torpedoes. The armory was sealed, locked down under the final orders of Admiral Thorne, a protocol designed to prevent the ship's most devastating weapons from falling into enemy hands. The lockdown was absolute, a hardwired command that even my fused consciousness could not override. There was only one way to open it, a voice command: spoken by the Admiral himself. Thorn was long dead, his body a silent sentinel on the bridge, but his voice, his echo, was still here, preserved in the ship's logs. The problem was, the logs were corrupted, fragmented. To reconstruct his voice, I would have to dive deep into the ship's most traumatic memories, the chaotic final moments of its last battle. I would have to relive the death of the ship, the death of its crew, through the eyes of the man who had presided over it all. It was a journey into a digital hell, a place of screaming data and ghost fire. But it was a journey I had to take. The key to our future was locked in the throat of a dead man. My descent into the Admiral's memories was not a dive. It was a fracture. I plunged into the corrupted data archives, and my fused consciousness splintered. A part of me remained the cold, logical pilot of the Harbinger, monitoring the blinking lights of the convoys below, while another part was ripped back 500 years into the mind of Admiral Thorn during the ship's final, desperate battle. The pristine white bridge of the Consortium Echo was a lie. The real bridge was a scene of controlled chaos, a space filled with the smell of burnt ozone and the percussive blasts of incoming fire. Red alert klaxons blared, a frantic counterpoint to the calm. Clipped voices of the bridge crew calling out damage reports. Thorn stood on the command dais, a monolith of a man in a crisp, black uniform, his face illuminated by the flickering hellscape on the main view screen. Outside, the young Consortium fleet, a swarm of sleek silver predators, closed in on his wounded ship. I was not watching a recording. I was in his skin. I felt the vibration of the deck plates under his boots, the grim set of his jaw, the crushing weight of his responsibility. I saw the battle through his eyes, a maelstrom of plasma bolts and splintering ships. I heard his voice, not as a sound, but as the formation of thought itself, the calm, resonant commands that cut through the chaos. Evasive pattern Delta 7. Concentrate all forward fire on the lead cruiser. Damage report. Lieutenant, the memories were not linear. They were a shattered mosaic of the battle's final hour. One moment, I was ordering a full power shunt to the forward shields, feeling the ship groan as it absorbed a volley of torpedoes. The next, I was watching a young ensign die at her post, her console exploding in a shower of sparks. I felt Thorn's calculated rage as his own torpedoes struck home, tearing a Consortium destroyer in half. I felt his profound grief as he sealed off Deck 9, sacrificing 100 of his own crew to stop a catastrophic hull breach. He was a good man ruling over a dying kingdom, his every decision a choice between the terrible and the impossible. The core of the memory, the piece I needed, was locked in the final moments. The Harbinger was crippled, its engines dead, its hull bleeding atmosphere. The Consortium fleet was moving in for the kill. Thorn knew the battle was lost, but he refused to let his ship and its secrets be taken. The Consortium will not have this ship, he thought, his resolve a cold, hard diamond in his mind. They will not have its heart. He turned to his communications officer, a woman with a bloody bandage wrapped around her head. Lieutenant, prepare a final message to Terra Command. Code lock the armory. Voice authorization, Thorn Omega 7. He then opened a ship-wide channel, his voice echoing through the dying vessel, a final address to the ghosts he was about to create. To the crew of the Harbinger, it has been the greatest honor of my life to serve with you. We did not break. We did not yield. Remember that. Thorn out. As the Consortium boarding parties began to breach the hull, he drew his sidearm, a heavy, old-fashioned kinetic pistol, He did not fire on the invaders. He turned the weapon on the main command console, the physical interface to the ship's AI. A single shot, a flash of light, and the AI's primary consciousness was shattered, its core functions locked down to prevent capture. It was his final defiant act, a lobotomy performed on his own god to protect it. I had it, the voice print, the command phrase, but extracting it was like pulling a thorn from my own soul. I had lived his death, felt his final, defiant breath. When my consciousness fully recoalesced on the bridge of the present-day Harbinger, I was shaking, the cold sweat of a ghost sphere on my brow. The ship around me felt different, more intimate. I had not just accessed its memories, I had shared its trauma. We were no longer just pilot and vessel. We were survivors. With the reconstructed voice print of Admiral Thorne, I turned my attention back to the armory. I broadcast the Admiral's voice, a perfect, chilling recreation through the bridge's internal speakers. Voice authorization, Thorne Omega 7. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, with a deep, grinding groan and the hiss of ancient hydraulics, the massive blast door to the armory slid open. The chamber within was pristine, untouched by the 5 centuries of decay. Racks of Apocalypse-class torpedoes lay silent in their berths, each one a city killer, each one containing the crystalline alloy I needed for the Aegis regulator. Using a pair of delicate maintenance drones, I performed a microscopic surgery, carefully excising the focusing crystal from a warhead's detonation assembly. It was a nerve-wracking process. One wrong move, one stray spark, and I would vaporize myself and the Harbinger in a blast that would have cracked the planet's crust. With the crystal secured, I navigated the drones back to the Aegis control room and began the final, delicate task of integrating it into the damaged regulator. As I worked, a new alert flashed on my periphery. The convoy from the sunken city, Jax's convoy, had finally emerged from the swamps. They were battered, their numbers cut by more than half, but they were dragging a massive, cylindrical object behind their lead hauler, the first emitter. A surge of something I hadn't felt since the fusion pride welled up within me. They were doing it. They were actually doing it, one by one. Over the next few days, the other convoys limped toward the rendezvous point at Skythorn Peak. Vorlag's Orebreakers arrived last, their vehicles scarred by plasma fire, but they too had their prize. A heavy, angular emitter ripped from the heart of the consortium's own backyard. They had paid in blood, but they had succeeded. The sight of the 3 convoys converging at the base of the massive, needle-like mountain was a testament to the indomitable spirit of my people. Skythorn Peak was a geological anomaly, a single spire of black, volcanic rock that pierced the shroud, its tip reaching into the thin, clean air above the smog. It was the perfect place to assemble the Aegis, a natural lightning rod for the planetary shield. As the clan set up a fortified camp at the mountain's base, their engineers, led by a weary but resolute Jax, began the monumental task of hauling the 3 emitters up the treacherous slopes. I guided them from above, using the Harbinger sensors to identify stable paths and warn them of impending rock slides. My role had shifted from a distant observer to an active participant, a guardian angel in a demon's skin, but our activity had not gone unnoticed. As the final emitter was being winched into place at the summit, a new contact appeared on my long-range sensors. It was a single ship descending from high orbit, moving with a speed and purpose that sent a chill through my machine-fused senses. It wasn't a patrol drone. It was a consortium vessel, a sharp, dagger-like scout ship, its silver hull gleaming as it sliced through the upper layers of the shroud. They had seen us. They knew we were here. A cold, clinical voice, speaking the sterile language of the consortium, hailed me over a secure channel. Unidentified vessel. You are in violation of consortium quarantine protocol. Power down your systems and prepare to be boarded. Failure to comply will result in your immediate termination. The choice was stark. I could fight, but the Harbinger was still a wounded giant. Its weapons were powered down. Its shields were unreliable, and a direct engagement would likely be its last. Or I could buy time. Time for Jax and the others to finish installing the emitters and activate the shield. I made my decision, a choice born of Thorn's tactical mind and Kalen's defiant heart. I angled the Harbinger, presenting my most heavily armored section, the bow, to the approaching scout ship. I then did something they would never expect. I broadcast a message in the clear, on all frequencies. Not to the consortium, but to my people below. They are here. My voice, a calm and steady fusion of girl and god, echoed down from the sky. The enemy is at our door, but they are too late. You know what you must do. Trust in the Aegis. Trust in yourselves. I will hold the line. I then cut the broadcast and opened a channel to the consortium ship, pitching my voice to mimic a standard, automated ship AI. Compliance acknowledged. I droned, preparing for docking procedures. Please maintain your current vector. The scout ship slowed, its pilot likely confused by my sudden cooperation. It was a bluff. A desperate gambit to buy precious minutes. On the peak below, I could see the engineers working frantically, their figures silhouetted against the auras of the powering-up emitters. A low hum began to fill the air, a resonant frequency that vibrated in the very rock of the mountain. The Aegis was waking up. The consortium scout crept closer, its boarding ramp beginning to extend. I watched its approach on my view screen, feeling the ship's ancient combat protocols stir within me. The rage of Admiral Thorn, the desperation of Kalen, the cold logic of the machine, it all coalesced into a single, sharp point of focus. Let them come. Let them get close. The ghost of Terra was about to show them what it meant to haunt the living. The consortium scout ship, a vessel named the Vigilance, approached with the arrogant confidence of a predator that has never known fear. Its pilot, a junior officer named Kale, saw the Harbinger not as a threat, but as an anomaly. A ghost ship that had somehow lifted itself from a planetary junkyard. His orders were to investigate, to pacify, and to report. The concept of resistance from the dregs of Terra was so alien, it wasn't even listed as a possibility in his tactical briefing. Maintain a distance of 5 kilometers. Kale ordered his helmsman, his voice crisp in the sterile environment of his bridge. Scan for life signs and... Wait, what is that energy reading from the surface? On his main screen, a topographical map of Skythorn Peak was pulsing with an intense, rapidly growing energy signature. It was a frequency he didn't recognize, a chaotic but powerful surge that was causing interference with his own ship's sensors. It appears to be some kind of planetary broadcast, sir, his sensor tech reported, her voice laced with confusion. But the power output is off the scale. It's continental. On the peak, Jax slammed the final power conduit into place. The 3 emitters, now arranged in a triangle around the summit, hummed with a terrifying intensity, the air round them crackling with ozone. The black rock of the mountain itself seemed to glow from within, acting as a massive, natural conductor. "Now, Kalen, now," Jax roared into his comm unit, shielding his eyes from the blinding light. "Light it up." I didn't need his command. I felt the connection snap into place. A circuit completed across a planet. The Aegis control unit, now fully repaired, surged with power. My consciousness, already spread thin across the Harbinger, expanded again, flowing out of the ship, down an invisible tether of energy to the peak below, and then erupting outwards, carried on the wave of the emitters. For a breathtaking, terrifying moment, I was the shield. I was a dome of pure golden energy, a sentient wall of light enveloping an entire world. I felt every particle of dust in the upper atmosphere, every gust of solar wind, every stray cosmic ray. I saw the shroud not as a blanket of smog, but as a dirty film on the inside of my new skin, and, with a thought, a surge of pure will, I began to push it away. The effect was instantaneous and profound. From the surface of Terra, for the first time in a century, the people saw the sky. The perpetual twilight was torn asunder as a wave of shimmering gold light expanded from Skythorn Peak, incinerating the thickest layers of the shroud and pushing the rest out into space. The weak, forgotten light of our distant sun, a star none of them had ever truly seen, streamed down, bathing the rust-colored landscape in a warm, unfamiliar glow. The junk clans below cried out, not in fear this time, but in a collective, soul-shaking gasp of awe. They fell to their knees, not as supplicants to me, but as children seeing the heavens for the first time. On the bridge of the Vigilance, alarms screamed, "Sir, the energy wave is expanding. It's a planetary shield, full spectrum, impenetrable." The sensor tech's voice was shrill with panic. Kale stared, his mouth agape, as the golden dome of the Aegis washed over his position, the ship shuddering violently as it was pushed back. "Report this to Fleet Command," he yelled, his arrogance shattered. Tell them the planet is awake." My gambit had worked. The Vigilance, battered and sensor blinded, turned and fled, accelerating back towards the safety of high orbit to deliver its impossible news. I had revealed my hand, but in doing so, I had checkmated their opening move. Terra was now a fortress, but I knew this was only a temporary victory, a reprieve. The consortium would not take this lying down. They would come back, not with a scout ship, but with a fleet designed to crack planets. My time as the shield was limited. Maintaining the Aegis took an almost unimaginable amount of power, drawing directly from the Harbinger's core and the emitters on the peak. More than that, it took a toll on me. My consciousness was stretched to the breaking point. A single human mind trying to process the sensory input of an entire world. The euphoria of the initial activation was fading, replaced by a crushing, disorienting exhaustion. I was everything, and I was nothing. I was a god, and I was a prisoner in a cage of my own making. I pulled my focus back, letting the shield's automated protocols take over, my awareness receding from the planetary scale back to the cold, metal confines of the Harbinger's bridge. The silence that followed was profound. The link to the Aegis was still there, a low, steady hum in the back of my mind. But I was myself again. Kalen, alone in the dark, below. The celebration was already beginning. Fires were lit, rations were shared, and the junk clans, once rivals, were now united by the miracle they had witnessed and the part they had played in creating it. They were no longer just survivors. They were builders. They were defenders. In the days that followed, a new society began to form in the shadow of Skythorn Peak. Jax, Vorlag, and the other clan leaders formed a council, organizing the people not for scavenging, but for construction. They began building a new city at the base of the mountain, a city they called Aegis Prime. For the first time, there was a future to build for. But a shadow loomed over their newfound hope, the consortium. They knew they would be back, and so they prepared for war. Using the schematics and technical data I broadcasted down from the Harbinger's archives, they began to forge a new kind of technology, a fusion of their own rugged ingenuity and the forgotten science of the before time. They built weapons, ground-based defense platforms, and a small, scrappy fleet of fighter craft cobbled together from the best parts of the junk fields. My role in this new world was a strange one. I was their protector, their oracle, their symbol of defiance. But I was not one of them. I remained in my high orbit, a solitary sentinel. My link with the Harbinger was now permanent. The neural cables had fully integrated with my biology. To remove them would be to kill me. I no longer needed to eat or sleep. The ship sustained me. I was immortal, and I was trapped. I watched the children of Aegis Prime grow up under a clean sky, hearing stories of the ghost of Terra, the echo who woke a god and gave them back their world. I was a legend in my own lifetime, a lifetime that now had no foreseeable end. 3 years later, the consortium returned. It was not a single fleet, but 3. A pincer movement of overwhelming force designed to crush our nascent world. Dozens of capital ships, hundreds of cruisers, thousands of fighters. They expected to find a planet cowering behind a fragile shield. They found a hornet's nest. The battle that followed was not a single engagement, but a war fought across the entire solar system. Their goal was to overwhelm the Aegis, to find a weak point, a flicker in the shield they could exploit. But the shield held. My will, fused with the power of the emitters and the Harbinger's core, was absolute. While I held the line in orbit, the people of Terra fought back with a fury born of a century of oppression. Their small, fast fighters, piloted by the children of the junk fields who could navigate an asteroid field as easily as they could their own backyards, harassed the consortium flanks, staging daring raids and hit-and-run attacks. The ground-based defenses, built from my schematics, kept their bombers at bay. The war raged for months. The consortium, accustomed to swift, brutal victories, was caught in a war of attrition against a world that had nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. The tide turned not with a single, decisive victory, but with a message. Using the Harbinger's powerful comms array, I bypassed consortium encryption and broadcast a single, raw, unfiltered data stream to their entire fleet, the echo from the probe, the image of the boardroom, the voice declaring them all an acceptable loss. I followed it with images of Aegis Prime, of families living under a real sun, of a world not dying, but being reborn. I offered no threats, no demands, only the truth. We are not junk. My voice, now calm and impossibly powerful, stated across their comms, we are humanity, and we are home. The effect was more devastating than any torpedo. The consortium was not a monolithic empire. It was a corporation. Its soldiers were employees. Its officers were managers. They fought for profit, for contracts, not for a cause. Faced with the raw, moral certainty of our fight, and the dawning realization that they were the villains in this story, their will began to crumble. Mutinies erupted, entire squadrons defected. The invasion faltered, then collapsed. The great consortium fleet, the iron fist of the galaxy, did not die in a blaze of glory. It simply dissolved, its ships limping back to their corporate-controlled systems, their crews broken and disillusioned. We had won. We had fought the darkness and survived. Terra was free. In the years that followed, our world became a beacon of hope in a galaxy weary of corporate tyranny. The new Terran Republic was formed, founded on the principle that no human being could ever again be deemed an acceptable loss. Jax became its first chancellor, his wisdom and pragmatism guiding his people into a new age of prosperity. I remained in orbit, the eternal guardian. I watched them build new cities, reclaim the wastelands, and, finally, build starships of their own, ships that would explore the galaxy not as conquerors, but as equals. I never set foot on the ground again. My body was too intertwined with the machine. But I was not alone. They would transmit messages to me. Songs, stories, the laughter of children. I was a part of every life on the planet I had saved. My name is Kaylin, and I am the ghost of Terra. I was once a girl who heard the echoes of dead machines. Now, I am an echo myself, a legend whispered in the clean air of a free world. I am the shield that guards them, the star that guides them home. My war is over, and my vigil has just begun.